27 Tazria 28 Metzora She will conceive Leper. Tazria-Metzora, she will conceive Leper. Parashah 27 Tazria, she conceives. Torah Tazria-Vayikra, Leviticus, 12:1-13-59, Haftarah Tazria-Metzora, 2 Kings, 42:5-19. Hadashah Tazria-Mattityahu, Matthew, 8:1-4, 11:2-6, Mark 1:40-45, Luke 2:22-24, 5:12-16, 7:18-23, Parashah 28 Metzora person afflicted with TZARA. Torah Metzora Leviticus, 14:1-15-33, Haftarah-Metzora 2 Kings, 7:3-20, Hadashah Metzora Matthew, 9:20-26, Mark 5:20-34, Luke 8:40-48. Messianic Jews, Hebrews, 13:4, in regular years read Parashah 27 with Parashah 28, in leap years read separately. Combo, Torah Tazria-Metzora Leviticus, 12:1-15-33. Haftarah Tazria-Metzora 2 Kings, 7:3-20, Hadashah Tazria-Metzora Mark 1:35-45, Luke 2:22-35, Torah Tazria-Metzora Leviticus, 12:1-15-33. 12:1 Adonai said to Moshe, tell the people of Israel, if a woman conceives and gives birth to a boy, she will be unclean for 7 days with the same uncleanness as in Niddah. When she is having her menstrual period, on the 8th day, the baby's foreskin is to be circumcised. She is to wait an additional 33 days to be purified from her blood. She is not to touch any holy thing or come into the sanctuary until the time of her purification is over, but if she gives birth to a girl, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her Niddah. And she is to wait another 66 days to be purified from her blood. When the days of her purification are over, whether for a son or for a daughter, she is to bring a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or dove for a sin offering to the entrance of the tent of meeting, to the Kohen. He will offer it before Adonai and make atonement for her, thus she will be purified from her discharge of blood. Such is the law for a woman who gives birth, whether to a boy or to a girl. If she can't afford a lamb, she is to take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, the one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. The Kohen will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. 13:1 Adonai said to Moshe and Aaron, if someone develops on his skin a swelling, scab or bright spot which could develop into the diseased TZARA, he is to be brought to Aaron the Kohen or to one of his sons who are Kohanim. The Kohen is to examine the sore on his skin. If the hair in the sore has turned white, and the sore appears to go deep into the skin, it is TZARA, and after examining him the Kohen is to declare him unclean. If the bright spot on his skin is white, but it does not appear to go deep into the skin, and its hair has not turned white, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day the Kohen is to examine him again, and if the sore appears the same as before and has not spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 more days. On the 7th day the Kohen is to examine him again, and if the sore has faded and hasn't spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to declare him clean. It is only a scab. So he is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab spreads further on the skin after he has been examined by the Kohen and declared clean, he is to let himself be examined yet again by the Kohen. The Kohen will examine him, and if he sees that the scab has spread on his skin, then the Kohen will declare him unclean. It is TZARA. If a person has TZARA, he is to be brought to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine him, and if he sees that there is a white swelling in the skin which has turned the hair white and inflamed flesh in the swelling, then it is chronic TZARA on his skin. And the Kohen is to declare him unclean. He is not to isolate him, because it is already clear that he is unclean. If the TZARA breaks out all over the skin, so that, as far as the Kohen can see, the person with TZARA has sores everywhere on his body, from his head to his feet, then the Kohen is to examine him, and if he sees that the TZARA has covered his entire body, he is to pronounce the person with the sores clean. It has all turned white, and he is clean. But if one day inflamed flesh appears on him, he will be unclean. The Kohen will examine the inflamed flesh and declare him unclean. The inflamed flesh is unclean. It is TZARA. However, if the inflamed flesh again turns white, he is to come to the Kohen. The Kohen will examine him, and if he sees that the sores have turned white, then the Kohen is to declare clean the person with the sores. He is clean. If a person has on his skin a boil that heals in such a way that in place of the boil there is a white swelling or a reddish-white bright spot, it is to be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine it. If he sees that it appears to be more than skin deep, and its hair has turned white, then the Kohen is to pronounce him unclean. The disease of tzeret is broken out in the boil. But if the Kohen looks at it and doesn't see any white hairs in it, and it isn't more than skin deep but appears faded, the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. If it spreads on the skin, the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is the disease. But if the bright spot stays where it was and has not spread, it is the scar of the boil. And the Kohen is to declare him clean, or if someone has on his skin a burn caused by fire, and the inflamed flesh where it was burned has become a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the Kohen is to examine it. And if he sees that the hair in the bright spot is turned white and that it appears to be deeper than the skin around it, it is tzeret. It is broken out in the burn, and the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a sore from tzeret. But if the Kohen examines it and sees no white hair in the bright spot, and it is no more than skin deep but looks faded, then the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day the Kohen is to examine him. If it has spread on the skin, then the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a sore from tzeret. But if the bright spot stays where it was and has not spread on the skin but appears faded, it is a swelling due to the burn, and the Kohen is to declare him clean. Because it is only a scar from the burn. If a man or woman has a sore on the head or a man in his beard, then the Kohen is to examine the sore. If he sees that it appears to be deeper than the skin around it, with yellow, thin hair in it, then the Kohen is to declare him unclean. It is a crusted area, a tzeret of the head or beard. If the Kohen examines the diseased crusted area and sees that it appears not to be deeper than the skin around it, and without any black hair in it, then the Kohen is to isolate for 7 days the person with the diseased crusted area. On the 7th day the Kohen is to examine the sore, and if he sees that the crusted area hasn't spread, that it has no yellow hair in it, and that the crusted area is not deeper than the skin around it, then the person is to be shaved, except for the crusted area itself, and the Kohen is to isolate him for 7 more days. On the 7th day the Kohen is to examine the crusted area. And if he sees that the crusted area has not spread on the skin and does not appear to be deeper than the skin around it, then the Kohen is to declare him clean. He is to wash his clothes and be clean. But if the crusted area spreads after his purification, then the Kohen is to examine him. And if he sees that the crusted area has spread on the skin, the Kohen is not to look for yellow hair. He is unclean. But if the crusted area's appearance doesn't change, and black hair grows up in it, then the crusted area is healed. He is clean, and the Kohen is to declare him clean. If a man or woman has bright spots on his skin, bright white spots, then the Kohen is to examine them. If he sees that the bright spots on the skin are dull white, it is only a rash that is broken out on the skin, he is clean. If a man's hair has fallen from his scalp, he is bald, but he is clean. If his hair has fallen off the front part of his head, he is forehead bald, but he is clean. But if on the bald scalp or forehead there is a reddish-white sore, it is tzeret breaking out on his bald scalp or forehead, then the Kohen is to examine him. If he sees that there is a reddish-white swelling on his bald scalp or forehead, appearing like tzeret on the rest of the body, he is a person with tzeret. He is unclean. The Kohen must declare him unclean. The sore is on his head. Everyone who has tzeret sores is to wear torn clothes and unbound hair, cover his upper lip and cry, unclean, unclean. As long as he has sores, he will be unclean. Since he is unclean, he must live in isolation. He must live outside the camp. When tzeret infects an article of clothing, whether it be a woolen or a linen garment, on the threads or the woven in parts of either linen or wool, or on a hide or item made of leather, then if the stain on the garment, hide, threads, woven in parts or leather item is greenish or reddish, it is an infection of tzeret and is to be shown to the Kohen. The Kohen is to examine the stain and isolate the article that is the infection for 7 days. On the 7th day he is to examine the stain. If the stain has spread on the garment, threads, woven in parts or leather, whatever its use, the infection is a contagious tzeret. The garment is unclean. He is to burn the garment, threads, woven in parts of either wool or linen, or item of leather having the infection, for it is a contagious tzeret. It must be burned up completely. But if, when the Kohen examines it, he sees that the infection has not spread on the garment or in the threads, woven in parts or leather item, Then the Kohen is to order that the article having the infection be washed and isolated for 7 more days. The Kohen is to examine it after the stain has been washed, and if he sees that the stain has not changed color, then, even though the stain has not spread, it is unclean. You are to burn it up completely. It is rotten, no matter whether the spot is on the outside or on the inside. If the Kohen examines it and sees that the stain has faded after being washed, then he is to tear the stain out of the garment, leather, threads or woven parts. Limafti, if it appears again in the garment, threads, woven parts or leather item, it is contagious, and you are to burn up completely the article that had the stain. But if the infection is gone from the garment, threads, woven parts or leather item that you washed, then it is to be washed a second time, and it will be clean. This is the law concerning infections of TZARA in a garment of wool or linen, or in the threads or the woven parts, or in any leather item, when to declare it clean and when to declare it unclean. 14:1 Adonai said to Moshe, this is to be the law concerning the person afflicted with TZARA on the day of his purification. He is to be brought to the Kohen, and the Kohen is to go outside the camp and examine him there. If he sees that the TZARA sores have been healed in the afflicted person, then the Kohen will order that 2 living clean birds be taken for the one to be purified, along with cedar wood, scarlet yarn and hyssop leaves. The Kohen is to order 1 of the birds slaughtered in a clay pot over running water. As for the live bird, he is to take it with the cedar wood, scarlet yarn and hyssop and dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird slaughtered over running water, and sprinkle the person to be purified from the TZARA 7 times. Next he is to set the live bird free in an open field. He who is to be purified must wash his clothes, shave off all his hair and bathe himself in water, then he will be clean, and after that, he may enter the camp. But he must lie outside his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day he is to shave all the hair off his head, also his beard and eyebrows he must shave off all his hair. And he is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and he will be clean. On the 8th day he is to take 2 male lambs without defect, 1 female lamb in its first year without defect, and 6½ quarts of fine flour for a grain offering, mixed with olive oil, and 2/3 of a pint of olive oil. The Kohen purifying him is to place the person being purified with these items before Adonai at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to take 1 of the male lambs and offer it as a guilt offering with a 2/3 pint of olive oil, then wave them as a wave offering before Adonai. He is to slaughter the male lamb at the place in the sanctuary for slaughtering sin offerings and burnt offerings, because the guilt offering belongs to the Kohen, just like the sin offering. It is especially holy. The Kohen is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the tip of the right ear of the person being purified, on the thumb of his right hand and on the big toe of his right foot. Next, the Kohen is to take some of the 2/3 pint of olive oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand. Dip his right finger in the oil that is in his left hand and sprinkle from the oil with his finger 7 times before Adonai. Then the Kohen is to put some of the remaining oil in his hand on the tip of the right ear of the person being purified, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot and on the blood of the guilt offering. Finally, the Kohen is to put the rest of the oil in his hand on the head of the person being purified. And the Kohen will make atonement for him before Adonai. The Kohen is to offer the sin offering and make atonement for the person being purified because of his uncleanness. Afterwards, he is to slaughter the burnt offering. The Kohen is to offer the burnt offering and the grain offering on the altar. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for him, and he will be clean. If he is poor, so that he can't afford to do otherwise, he is to take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering to be waved, to make atonement for him. 2 quarts of fine flour mixed with olive oil for a grain offering, 2/3 of a pint of olive oil, and 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, such as he can afford, the one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. On the 8th day, he will bring them to the Kohen for his purification, to the entrance of the tent of meeting before Adonai. The Kohen is to take the lamb of the guilt offering and the 2/3 of a pint of olive oil and wave them as a wave offering before Adonai. He is to slaughter the lamb of the guilt offering. And the Kohen is to take some of the blood of the guilt offering and put it on the tip of the right ear of the person being purified, on the thumb of his right hand and on the big toe of his right foot. The Kohen is to take some of the olive oil and pour it into the palm of his own left hand, and sprinkle with his right hand some of the oil that is in his left hand 7 times before Adonai. The Kohen is to put some of the oil in his hand on the tip of the right ear of the person being purified, on the thumb of his right hand, on the big toe of his right foot in the same place as the blood of the guilt offering. Finally, the Kohen is to put the rest of the oil in his hand on the head of the person being purified, to make atonement for him before Adonai. He is to offer one of the doves or young pigeons, such as the person can afford. Whatever his means suffice, for the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering with the grain offering. Thus the Kohen will make atonement before Adonai for the person being purified. Such is the law for the person who has TZARA if he cannot afford the usual elements used for his purification. Adonai said to Moshe and Aaron, when you have entered the land of Canaan which I am giving you as a possession, and I put an infection of TZARA in a house in the land that you possess, then the owner of the house is to come and tell the Kohen, it seems to me that there may be an infection in the house. The Kohen is to order the house emptied before he goes in to inspect the infection, so that everything in the house won't be made unclean. Afterwards, the Kohen is to enter and inspect the house. He will examine the infection. And if he sees that the infection is in the walls of the house, with greenish or reddish depressions that seem to go in deeper than the surface of the wall, he is to go out of the house to its door and seal up the house for 7 days. The Kohen will come again on the 7th day and examine the house. If he sees that the infection has spread over its walls, he is to order them to remove the infected stones and throw them into some unclean place outside the city. Next, he is to have the inside of the house thoroughly scraped, and the scraped-off plaster is to be discarded outside the city in an unclean place. Finally, other stones must be set in the place of the first stones and other plaster used to replaster the house. If the infection returns and breaks out in the house after the stones have been removed and the house scraped and plastered, then the Kohen is to enter and examine it. If he sees that the infection has spread in the house, it is a contagious TZARA in the house, it is unclean. He must break down the house and take its stones, timber and plaster out of the city to an unclean place. Moreover, whoever enters the house at any time while it is sealed up will be unclean until evening. Whoever lies down or eats in the house must wash his clothes. If the Kohen enters, examines and sees that the infection has not spread in the house since it was plastered, then he is to declare the house clean, because the infection is cured. To purify the house, he is to take 2 birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn and hyssop leaves. He is to slaughter one of the birds in a clay pot over running water. He is to take the cedar wood, the hyssop, the scarlet yarn and the live bird and dip them in the blood of the slaughtered bird and in the running water, and sprinkle the house 7 times. He will purify the house with the blood of the bird, and the running water, the live bird, the cedar wood, the hyssop and the scarlet yarn. But he is to set the live bird free outside the city in an open field, thus will he make atonement for the house, and it will be clean. Such is the law for all kinds of TZARA, for a crusted area, for TZARA in a garment, for a house, for a swelling, for a scab and for a bright spot. To determine when it is clean and when it is unclean, this is the law concerning TZARA. 15:1 Adonai said to Moshe and Aaron, tell the people of Israel, when any man has a discharge from his body, the discharge is unclean. The discharge is unclean no matter whether it continues flowing or has stopped, it is still his uncleanness. Every bed which the person with a discharge lies on is unclean, and everything he sits on is unclean. Whoever touches his bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on anything the person with a discharge sat on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches the body of the person with a discharge is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with a discharge spits on someone who is clean, the latter is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any saddle that the person with a discharge rides on will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening. He who carries those things is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with a discharge fails to rinse his hands in water before touching someone, that person is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with a discharge touches a clay pot, it must be broken. If he touches a wooden utensil, it must be rinsed in water. When a person with a discharge has become free of it, he is to count 7 days for his purification. Then he is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in running water. After that, he will be clean. On the 8th day, he is to take for himself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, come before Adonai to the entrance of the tent of meeting and give them to the Kohen. The Kohen is to offer them, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering, thus the Kohen will make atonement for him on account of his discharge before Adonai. If a man has a seminal emission, he is to bathe his entire body in water, he will be unclean until evening. Any clothing or leather on which there is any semen is to be washed with water. It will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with a woman and has sexual relations, both are to bathe themselves in water, they will be unclean until evening. If a woman has a discharge, and the discharge from her body is blood, she will be in her state of niddah for 7 days, whoever touches her will be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on or sits on in her state of niddah will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, he will be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything she sits on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, he will be unclean until evening. As soon as he touches the bed or something she sat on, he will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with her, and her menstrual flow touches him, he will be unclean 7 days. And every bed he lies on will be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days not during her period, or if her discharge lasts beyond the normal end of her period, then throughout the time she is having an unclean discharge she will be as when she is in niddah she is unclean. Every bed she lies on at any time while she is having her discharge will be for her like the bed she uses during her time of niddah. And everything she sits on will be unclean with uncleanness like that of her time of niddah. Whoever touches those things will be unclean. He is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If she has become free of her discharge, she is to count 7 days. After that, she will be clean. On the 8th day, she is to take for herself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the Kohen at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to offer the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for her before Adonai on account of her unclean discharge. Mafti 31 In this way you will separate the people of Israel from their uncleanness, so that they will not die in a state of uncleanness for defiling my tabernacle which is there with them. Such is the law for the person who has a discharge, for the man who has a seminal emission that makes him unclean, for the woman in niddah during her menstrual period, for the person, man or woman, with a discharge, and for the man who has sexual relations with a woman who is unclean. Haftarah Tazria-Metzora Emlachim Bet, 2 Kings, 7:3-20. 7:3 Now there were 4 men with Tzeret at the entrance to the city gate, and they said to each other, Why should we sit here till we die? If we say, We'll enter the city, then the city has been struck by the famine, so we'll die there, and if we sit still here, we'll also die, so let's go and surrender to the army of Aram. If they spare our lives, we will live, and if they kill us, we'll only die. They got up during the twilight to go to the camp of Aram. But when they reached the outskirts of the camp of Aram, they saw no one, for Adonai had caused the army of Aram to hear the sound of chariots and horses. It sounded like a huge army. And they said to each other, The king of Israel must have hired the kings of the Hittite and the kings of the Egyptians to attack us. So they jumped up and fled in the twilight, leaving their tents, horses, donkeys and the whole camp just as it was, and ran for their lives. When these men with Tzeret reached the outskirts of the camp, they entered one of the tents, ate and drank, then took some silver, gold and clothing, and went and did it. Next they returned and entered another tent, took stuff from there, and went and did it. But finally they said to each other, What we are doing is wrong. At a time of good news like this, we shouldn't keep it to ourselves. If we wait even till morning, we will earn only punishment, so come on, let's go and tell the king's household. So they came and shouted to the gatekeepers of the city and told them the news. We went to the camp of Aram, and no one was there, no human voice, just the horses and donkeys tied up, and the tents left in place. The gatekeepers called and told it to the king's household inside. Then the king got up in the night. He said to his servants, I'll tell you what Aram has done to us. They know that we're hungry, so they've gone outside the camp and hidden in the countryside, saying, When they come out of the city, we'll take them alive and then get inside the city. One of his servants answered, I suggest letting some men take 5 of the remaining horses that are left in the city. They are like everything else in Israel that remains. Like everything else in Israel, practically finished, and we'll send and see. So they took 2 chariots with horses, and the king sent after the army of Aram, saying, Go, and see. They went after them all the way to the Yarden, and found the entire distance strewn with clothing and other articles Aram had thrown away in their haste, the messengers returned and told the king. Then the people went out and ransacked the camp of Aram, with the result that 6 quarts of fine flour was sold for only a shekel and half a bushel of barley for a shekel. In keeping with what Adonai had said, the king put the servant on whose arm he had leaned in charge of the gate, and the people trampled him down in the gateway, so that he died, as the man of God had said he would. Who spoke when the king came to him? For the man of God had said to the king, "Tomorrow by this time 6 quarts of barley will sell for only a shekel and half a bushel of fine flour for a shekel, in the market, at the gate of Shomron." The servant had answered the man of God, "Why, this couldn't happen even if Adonai made windows in heaven." And Elisha had said, "All right, you yourself will see it with your own eyes. But you won't eat any of it." That is exactly what happened to him, because the people trampled him down in the gateway, so that he died. Pirit Hadashah Tazria-Metzora Mark 1:35-45, Luke 2:22-35. Mark 1:35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Yeshua got up, left, went away to a lonely spot and stayed there praying, but Shimon and those with him went after him. And when they found him, they said, "Everybody is looking for you." He answered, "Let's go somewhere else to the other villages around here. I have to proclaim the message there too. In fact, this is why I came out." So he traveled all through the Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and expelling demons. A man afflicted with tzeret came to Yeshua and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Yeshua reached out his hand, touched him and said to him, "I am willing, be cleansed." Instantly the tzeret left him, and he was cleansed. Yeshua sent him away with this stern warning, "See to it that you tell no one." Instead, as a testimony to the people, "Go and let the Kohen examine you, and offer for your cleansing what Moshe commanded." But he went out and began spreading the news, talking freely about it. So that Yeshua could no longer enter a town openly but stayed out in the country, where people continued coming to him from all around. Luke 2:22. When the time came for their purification according to the Torah of Moshe, they took him up to Jerusalem to present him to Adonai, as it is written in the Torah of Adonai. Every firstborn male is to be consecrated to Adonai, and also to offer a sacrifice of a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons, as required by the Torah of Adonai. There was in Jerusalem a man named Shimon. This man was a tzaddik, he was devout, he waited eagerly for God to comfort Israel, and the Ruach HaKodesh was upon him. It had been revealed to him by the Ruach HaKodesh that he would not die before he had seen the Messiah of Adonai. Prompted by the Spirit, he went into the temple courts. And when the parents brought in the child Yeshua to do for him what the Torah required, Shimon took him in his arms, made a berakah to God, and said, "Now, Adonai, according to your word, your servant is at peace as you let him go, for I have seen with my own eyes your Yeshua, which you prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light that will bring revelation to the Gentiles, and glory to your people Israel." Yeshua's father and mother were marveling at the things Shimon was saying about him. Shimon blessed them and said to the child's mother, Miriam, "This child will cause many in Israel to fall and to rise. He will become a sign whom people will speak against. Moreover, a sword will pierce your own heart too." All this will happen in order to reveal many people's inmost thoughts,